Hi everyone and welcome to today's webinar, PFAS Regulations, Are You Ready for What Comes Next? So really quickly just want to do a quick run through of the orientation of the webinar platform before I introduce our speaker for today. The webinar slides are available on the left side of your screen, along with a few more helpful links if you'd like to explore and learn more about compliance and risks and how we can help simplify and accelerate your compliance processes. And we do want this webinar to be as engaging as possible, so make sure to send us any questions you may have, and we'll aim to address them during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. So if you'd like to submit a question for the Q&A session, just use the Ask a Question block on the left side of your screen, and you can submit as many questions as you like. We don't cap it. We'll aim to address them, as I said, during the Q&A section, but if we don't get to it, we'll reach out to you directly with an answer. And at any time, if you're interested in our team in following up with you outside of this Q&A function, don't hesitate to use the Start a Conversation button at the bottom of your screen. And last but not least, the webinar recording will be sent to you within 24 hours. So my name is Orla Morris and I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at Compliance and Risks, and I'm delighted to be joined by Kathy Phillips, Principal Regulatory Consultant with RINA. So Kathy has been helping companies figure out where they have PFAS in their products and what to do about it since 2016. She has helped manage REACH in businesses since 2008 and is a technical expert on global environmental compliance, product and chemical safety by covering legislation such as EU and UK REACH, ROS and its equivalent WE, GHS/CLP, POPs, F-gas, Proposition 65 TSCA, and global PFAS regulations. She also works across product safety on eco-design, critical raw materials and rare earth elements, and conflict minerals. Kathy has worked with companies from many diverse sectors, including maritime, defence, aerospace, energy, rail, nuclear, food technology, medical equipment, and consumer goods. She has expertise in managing compliance across large multinationals through to small specialist companies. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kathy.
Nice to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Great. So before we kick off the webinar and I pass you back over to Kathy, I just want to give a really quick background about compliance and risks for those who are joining us for the first time. So at Compliance and Risks, our mission is to help ensure global companies have the tools and information to build safe, sustainable products in a world full of change. And we are the trusted product compliance technology provider for some of the world's leading brands and have spent 2 decades honing the digital tools, expertise, and content you need to stay ahead of the dynamic regulatory landscape, proving your product's compliance, protecting your brand, and importantly, helping to drive your growth. And we do have the world's most comprehensive regulatory database with over 100,000 regulations historically available in our product compliance and sustainability platform, C2P. And with a global regulatory coverage and expertise across over 10 industries, we understand that regulatory compliance definitely doesn't sleep. And our regulatory expert team, who are the true superheroes behind our technology and content, is truly global, with 28 languages collectively spoken across the team and fortified by our 30 knowledge partners. And as mentioned, C2P is our enterprise software designed to help keep organizations on top of regulatory changes and their impact worldwide. And key features to help you achieve this include early warning alerts, impact probability, productivity workflow tools, and so much more. And with that, I'm delighted to hand it over to you, Kathy.
Thanks for that. And it's a good tool. We use it for areas that are not our expertise, and we provide content where we do. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about PFAS. So we have the main PFAS laws in Europe, United States, Canada, where things are going with that. Restrictions and reporting requirements, the absolute latest. Developments in PFAS legislation, and then What should we be doing right now? Because it changes with the wind, it seems. So just a recap for those of you who've seen this before, and if you're not aware, where are you going to find your PFAS? It's in all sorts of things that you might find in your factory, from firefighting foams, PPE, and stain-resistant fabric treatments and things like that. It'll be in your products and in your factory, in circuit boards, every semiconductor chip. It'll be in flexible plastics, cable, wire insulation, anything that's for a harsh environment. And it's in everything from hydraulic fluid, gaskets, seals, tubes, sealant, flexible joints. And it's in batteries, shock absorbers, bushes, and bearing surfaces. It's in such a lot of places that there really probably aren't that many complex articles out there that haven't got some of it in somewhere. Now, the thing with PFAS is that not everyone can agree on what PFAS means. It's poly and perfluorinated alkyl substances, but different people draw the line on different places. So the OECD definition has one grouping. The UK definition is subtly different. The EU definition is the same as the OECD definition, which helps. And the US definition is different again. And you can't assume that as you go across the US states that they all agree with the federal definition either. So be sure of your market and know where the goalposts are as to what PFAS is. I'm going to go through each of the different areas now where PFAS regulation is changing considerably. And let's start in Europe. So in Europe, we've already got from the Stockholm Convention strict limits on PFOS, PFOA, PFHXS, and we've got long chain fluorocarboxylic acids added just last year. And these are prohibited in manufacture, placing on the market and use, except for really narrow exemptions which are listed in the Stockholm Convention. But where's it going? Well, we've got some specific uses that are just coming through, like firefighting foams, but we have got the large-scale use of PFAS that's looking at being restricted in the relatively near future. Part of the targeting of more high-hazard PFASs that are as SVHCs. Some of the number of PFAS that are on the SVHC list is increasing, and those PFAS, at least if they're there in a product at greater than 0.1% weight by weight in your article, you should be being told about it. Unfortunately, the vast majority of PFAS are still not on that candidate list, and so you don't know it's there. In terms of what's happening in Tosca, we have I appear to have, I'm just a bit thrown because I appear to be missing a slide that I hadn't realised. In terms of the PFAS legislation changes in the EU, the important thing to know is that next month there's going to be a consultation exercise from the socioeconomic committee, which will be focusing on all of the different uses of PFAS and whether or not it's likely to have a derogation in place. It's important to know which of those derogations are going to be relevant to your product or not. In the information that has been put forward since the last consultation happened, there's been an extra 8 groups of uses that are going to be included in this particular new consultation. So it's really important that you look to see where your products and uses within your products could be, whether it's in the original groupings of uses that could have an exemption, or if it's in one of the new groupings where they don't have an awful lot of evidence, and they'll be looking for you to provide that information to know whether there are uses that are unavoidable at the moment or not. So now I'm going to move on to TSCA. The important thing here is that with in the US, you have got a proposed information gathering legislation federally. The information that they're collecting was originally proposed to be everything that's manufactured, whether it's manufactured in the US or whether it's manufactured outside the US and then imported as a substance or mixture, but also PFAS in imported articles. And this was going to cause manufacturers of articles, everything from toys through to aircraft. It was going to be an absolute nightmare to be able to find all of that. However, there's now been a proposal for exemption of imported articles. And there's also a proposed exemption if you're a small company importing articles. So that would have quite a big difference. The thing is, it's taking a long time, it appears, for that proposed change to go through the process. We'll have to wait and see when we're going to get that final rule, but it is still moving, where many other things that the EPA have been doing has kind of come to a grinding halt. The key obligations, as I mentioned, are to do with reporting. There's also obligations on record keeping. We don't know when the proposed exemption is likely to come into effect. And that really will make a big difference about what information we're all going to have to put in and when that information is going to be required by. The proposal is that it gets pushed back, and that will be very welcome. But when, we can't yet say with any certainty whether these dates are going to be the dates that happen. Now, because things are sort of getting pushed further and further back across federal USA, each of the individual states are looking at moving things forward on their own. So initially we had a group of states, Minnesota and Maine, who have decided that going back in time, that they are going to prohibit certain uses where there's particularly high risk from PFAS, and they've already started doing this. So in Minnesota, firefighting foam and food packaging was prohibited in 2024. Sale of various household goods and cosmetics, personal care, that kind of thing, last year. And starting this year, in July, will be reporting requirements on other PFAS, because the intention that they have in Minnesota is from 2032 to prohibit all uses of PFAS unless it's granted and recognized by the Minnesota government as being a currently unavoidable use. And that concept is something that a lot of individual states are grabbing hold of and looking at using. Another state with very similar methods of regulating is Maine. So in Maine, from the beginning of this year, they have a prohibition on consumer products, similar kind of consumer products as in Minnesota, and again using this currently unavoidable use code idea, where if you contact Maine and you say, I have a currently unavoidable use, and they believe you, they'll recognize that, and then you will be able to continue to use in those specific applications after the deadline. And they're looking at, again, a 2032 deadline for getting rid of the majority of uses. New Mexico have joined the club with planning to have an intentionally added PFAS ban unless it's currently unavoidable use for 2032. And again, this is requiring submission of information to the state, including information about the product and whether or not you have a currently unavoidable use. There are some specific exclusions that are in the New Mexico statute. Unfortunately, what the exclusions are vary state by state. So a lack of federal leadership is causing there to be a significant divergence in approaches across the states, but things do seem to be coalescing around some kind of comprehensive ban and some sort of currently unavoidable use derogation, where there's currently ideas to have a comprehensive ban, magic date being 2032 for those 3 states. But it's not just them. So California has legislation. They started back in 2023, looking at, again, similar products phase out as you have in the other states I've already mentioned. They are looking at moving forward. That initially they were going to do something along the lines of a all-encompassing ban, but that isn't at the moment something that moved forward. It was stopped in its tracks. But you never know, it might move forward perhaps under another senator. In Colorado, again, they already have some bans. And again, they are moving forward with prohibiting various products. So things like medical floor maintenance products that have a prohibition that's planned for 2028. So even in areas where you would think that there's going to be some currently unavoidable use for some medical uses, it is that there's already proposed regulation there because they believe that there's alternatives. In Connecticut, we've got a similar thing, kind of, again, all consumer products are looking at a ban in 2028 for really a really wide range of different uses. And then it will move forward, and they are, as are many of these others, looking at but not yet legislating for complete ban at some point in the future. And Illinois, where we have a very similar group to the other states, looking at exclusions from 2032 again. So overall then, just looking at all of those states, in summary, for Minnesota, Maine, and New Mexico, you have got this currently unavoidable use model. And for the other states, no, you don't have yet, not yet, but they are looking at how it works in Minnesota, Maine, and New Mexico. You've got a proposed final phase-out date of 2032 in those first 3 states, but other places, they're looking at it, they're pondering it. Some of them are trying to get the way through that with their legislatures. And one thing you can definitely say is the movement is towards getting it phased out. Moving then on to Canada, I can see I've got a lot of questions about this. The question time is going to be important for you guys, isn't it? Looking at what's happened in Canada. So as of last year, reports were to be submitted to the regulator on PFAS products sold into Canada in 2023. Then they produced a state of PFAS report, which identified where they thought it all was, and then they decided on their risk management approach. their risk management approach is to not, at the moment, do a blanket ban, as is being considered in Minnesota, Maine, and New Mexico, and is being considered in Europe. What they're looking at doing is starting off with it on a use by use type approach for the first phase. So the prohibition of PFAS in firefighting foams is phase 1. They will be looking at some point this year, announcing what the targeted uses of PFAS for phase 2 will be. I don't think it would be unreasonable to expect that the targeted uses are probably going to be the same targeted uses that we'll see in Europe and in those states where they've named dates for phase out in things like your carpet, your ski wax, and so on. Don't be surprised if that is where they go, although nothing has been announced so far. And EU with the proposed restriction. So it is proposed under REACH, so it's under an existing framework. It covers a universal ban with an 18-month transition period. It includes manufacture, placing on the market, and use. And it covers nearly all of the remaining uses of PFAS that haven't already been regulated. There are many through POPs or whatever. Derogations for specific uses are granted for 5 or 12 years, and they are probably going to be the same kind of things that in the US would be currently unavoidable uses. And some derogations will be for an unlimited period of time, and that's because they are covered with other legislation. So the kinds of things that you would expect here would be something that is regulated because it's a food contact material, or because it is a medical device where an alternative would take quite a long time to qualify. So where things are regulated heavily in another area, then you might have a derogation for an unlimited time. But where you've got those derogations, the European Chemicals Agency SEAC committee lead said in a webinar recently that for those use sectors where you'll have derogations, risk control measures may be implemented in addition. That means that you should expect there to be controls on worker exposure and controls on emissions through air, through water, and into the ground. So it's going to be really interesting to see what it is that they're going to be expecting, the levels that they're going to be expecting where there are derogations, and how businesses are going to need to adapt to that. That's something new that all of us in this area are really exploring to see how we can help our client base. So where are we at with it? Well, we've had the consultation phase 1. The SEAC consultation is due next month, as I mentioned. It's going to cover the original 14 sectors of use and the additional 8. So that the additional 8 are printing, sealing, machinery, other medical that wasn't already discussed, military, so no exemption on military specifically needs to be discussed, explosives, technical textiles, and broader industry uses. So if you are using it in a niche way, they need to hear from you in this consultation. It's really important. And it's intended that this consultation, this is your last chance. It's going to cover the full scope of the restriction. You have to consult via the online survey. You can't add attachments. Only socioeconomic aspects will be considered. So you must you can download right now the information about what they're asking, prepare your answers to those questions ready to submit when it opens. So get organized, get ready, get hold of that information that's available now, and start putting down on paper what it is that you're going to be looking for, and why you need a derogation if it's not already clearly shown that you're going to get one. So preparing for that consultation. So they really must have strong stakeholder engagement in those 8 sectors. Otherwise, there aren't going to be any exemptions in those areas. Stakeholders must provide it in the form, yes, and they will adopt their final opinion at the end of this year. That will then go through to the Parliament with the stuff from the Risk Assessment Committee, and we will then have next year the actual final regulation. So you can go and see the survey guidance document. You can search for that, you'll find it. And there's also use mapping information that is already available. Go and look at those. So the proposed derogations that we have so far are fluorinated gases, diagnostic and calibration equipment, military uses where there's strong evidence for the lack of alternatives, not for everything necessarily, lubricants and lubricant additives, batteries, this is particularly lithium-ion batteries, hard chrome plating, filtration and separation of air and other gases, semiconductor manufacture and photonics, industrial use in machinery applications, but coatings on displays and lenses and spare parts. Now, these are all things that have got a derogation that looks like it's going to go ahead. Other derogations perhaps lacked evidence. So if in their documents that are available on the website, if they haven't got sufficient evidence, if you don't provide it now, that's your lot. It's tough, it won't be there as a derogation. Each of these uses are very, very clearly defined in the documentation on the ECHA website. Moving on now to what's happening in the UK. So current legislation is very much targeted against compliance with Stockholm Convention of POPs regulation, as it was in Europe, but the UK is lagging behind. Firefighting foams placed on the market after 2020 as well. However, recently, the UK government has stated its intent to align UK REACH with its closest trading partners, particularly the EU, by 2028. What this means is, in particular, that you should expect there to be quite a lot of alignment between what the candidate list is looking like for both the EU and UK REACH. So UK REACH will move more in alignment with that. Where you have PFAS on the candidate list in the EU, it should be coming onto the UK candidate list too. And there should be, I would say, things that are already prohibited in the EU, you should be expecting to see them coming through in the UK. However, you're not necessarily going to be seeing any kind of broad brush prohibition in the UK. So looking ahead, in summary, where we're at, we've got EU REACH with the Annex 17 restriction. Consultation starts next month. Adoption expected next year. Derogations have been modified by industry engagement. It is really, really worthwhile engaging in this second consultation stage. It's your last chance. In the UK, you've got targeted selective measures in what's going to be happening. UK plans to be closer to the EU. It's not currently considering that universal ban. It's regulating PFAS in subgroups. It'll probably watch to see how things go in the EU. And whilst we carry on with this government, expect alignment. In the US, okay, at the federal level, things have been watered down and the reporting for imported articles looks like it's going to be axed. We don't know exactly when. They haven't published that yet. Additional restrictions and reporting requirements are growing in individual US states. They're not all the same. There's divergence of scope and timelines, but what you can expect is that the kinds of consumer articles that are starting to be prohibited, expect those to start to be prohibited across more and more states. Expect there to be some kind of universal ban to be coming different times for different states. And it's not unreasonable to assume that if you can demonstrate a currently unavoidable use in one US state, that you should be able to use that same argument in other US states. So it's worth really exploring how that works. Unfortunately, though, with the divergence, it just means a lot more regulatory bureaucracy and work. So what can you do about it? Where do you stand? If this is the first time you've been to a webinar on PFAS, I'm sorry that it's a bit scary. For those of you who've been to these things before, then if you've been working through this, then it's not quite so frightening. Yes, you need to know the PFAS requirements in your markets and in your supply chain. That takes quite a bit of digging. You might need to get contractually some information to get that going, but that is absolutely key, because if you can't find it, you can't manage it, you can't know your business risk. If when you find that you know where your PFAS are, if you're planning to use a derogation for your uses, then you need to start preparing a site-specific management plan where your PFAS is, that's detailing your PFAS use. What's the health and safety protections you've got in place? Where does the waste streams go if you have to start managing that rigorously? What's the current state? What might you need to do? And also, if you're going to use a derogation, how can you justify that? Don't just assume, write it down and say, we believe we can use this derogation because, and keep that evidence trail in your back pocket, because you'll want that for due diligence if anybody challenges you. Assess the risk to your business of keeping using PFAS and manage the risk. You'll notice that this is an obsolescence threat because more and more manufacturers of PFAS are leaving the market. Already we've had 3M leave, and other companies are seriously considering their options. So don't assume that if you want to keep using it, it's still going to be on the market. Respond to the SEAC consultation next month. Respond in any trade associations that you're part of. Respond as an individual company, particularly if your risk is high. Collate and record your PFAS product and consumable data to comply with legislation if you're selling to places where that information is required to be reported. And start looking at the R&D that you have on alternatives to PFAS. Redesign it to remove the need for it wherever you can, and keep up to date with the legislation because it is changing so quickly right now. There are some things where we don't know one day to the next as to what the answer is going to be and when the legislation is going to change. So I can see we have ever such a lot of questions, folks. So let's get started on those. I've sort of rattled through that so I can try and answer as many of these as possible. Where would you like to start?
Brilliant. Well, yeah, thank you for that, Kathy. And I'm sitting here watching the questions pile up as you were talking. But yeah, thank you all so much for your attention so far and for all the questions you're submitting. So yeah, as Kathy mentioned, the floor is now open for the Q&A session. So just to remind, it feels like every person here has submitted a question, but just in case you don't know how to, the ask a question box should be on the left side of your screen. So if you have any questions at all regarding this topic, please do use it. We do have incoming ones already. So Kathy, you're happy for me just to run through the list as they came in, or
yeah,
do you have any
give
preference?
it a go? And if I can, I'll answer whatever I can. And sometimes I might have to say I'll have to park that and come back depending on how much I know and whether I've got the information to my fingertips. But go for it.
Great, sounds good. So how many PFAS are there on the EU SVHC list?
There are 15, and the latest one that was added just this month is bisphenol AF. That's used to make fluoroelastomers and also used in specialist high temperature plastics, which could go into various composites and in electronics. So that might, if you make electronics, that might be an area where you've not had to do a declaration before, but with the bisphenol AF, maybe now you will. And as I say, it's used to make fluoroelastomers. It isn't necessarily in the remaining, in the fluoroelastomer, unless it's there in trace amounts. But it's an area where you're probably going to want to take a good look. Okay, what's the next one? Yeah.
Great. When will we know for certain that the US EPA will exempt imports of articles from the PFAS reporting requirement?
Right. Okay. So where the amendments that have been proposed by the US EPA have gone through the consultation stage. That closed at the end of December. Now, according to the independent analysis on what's happening at the EPA, you need to know that about 1 in 3 of the people who work there have lost their jobs in this current administration. So there's an awful lot less people in the EPA there now. So actually, if they left these, if they didn't implement this consultation, they probably would not be able to process the sheer amount of data that they'd get from the information requirement. So I think that they're going to push it on and try and get it through really quite quickly. This is my personal opinion of where we're at, looking at the politics as well as looking at the facts. So yes, it's impossible to say how long it's going to take to process the comments and then to move it forward into the next step of getting the amendment included into the statute book. However, I do think that they'll try and move it on as quickly as they can. So I do think that we're going to get that derogation that's going to prevent imported articles from needing to be part of it sooner rather than later. Take what you think that will be. It's kind of, I can't tell you when. Okay, what's the next question?
Yeah. Do you think Canada will implement a universal ban on all uses of PFAS?
Not anytime soon. I think that, like most of the world, Canada are looking to see what happens in the EU and in various US states. I think that Canada will continue to regulate in line with looking at specific individual substance uses and regulate those, and that it will probably, if it does go at any point in the future to a generic ban, it would probably either have the current and the unavoidable use model or some kind of set of derogations or something similar. But that's my best guess. It's my personal best guess. It's best I can do for you. Okay.
Great.
Next question.
With two broad ones now. I'll start with this one of what is happening with PFAS regulation in Asia?
Okay, not a lot is the short answer. Stockholm Convention of POPs, where you've got PFAS in that, they've been implemented. In South Korea, in their legislation, they're grouping PFAS by structure or function so that you can they can regulate it in groups rather than just one massive lot of PFAS, or rather than individual substances. But no Asian country is yet at the point of contemplating universal bans or anything like that. So I think they're going to see what happens everywhere else. Yeah.
Okay. And then there's just one that's quite similar of what is happening across the rest of the US states.
Okay. So in New York, they're looking at something very similar to Minnesota and Maine. Illinois are looking at doing some kind of thing like Minnesota, so they're looking at moving on. Indiana are looking at doing something similar to Minnesota, and New Jersey and Massachusetts and Maryland. So there's a lot of states that are at the early stages of doing something that will move to universal bans of PFAS, starting off looking at regulating significant consumer uses, looking at unavoidable uses, and then going on to a more generic ban. So that's what's happening. It's all moving.
Okay. And just staying with the states, why does the US states in particular for PFAS bans restrict to intentionally added PFAS, but the EU is agnostic on whether intentionally added or not?
The US are not really considering the fact that it doesn't matter whether it's intentionally added or not for it to be a forever chemical and pollute. It's just whether it's there or not. So the EU are concerned about whether it's actually physically there or not. In America, they're looking at it from a point of view of, well, can you actually have you put it in there deliberately? So there might be a whole host of PFAS that you didn't put in there deliberately because you're using a recyclate that was contaminated with it. It just happens to be there anyway. So it's kind of, in America, it's looking at it, well, is it the fault of the article manufacturer that it's there? Whereas in the EU is, if it's there, it's the fault of the article manufacturer. It's looking at it in a different way. Yeah.
Okay, great. Another one is having our suppliers regularly and formally confirm there are no substances from both RSL and SVHC lists a robust enough means of confirming our products are free from PFAS?
No, because SVHC lists will only tell you whether you've got a PFAS in your product at greater than 0.1% weight by weight. But in the EU, the regulation is going to be down at the parts per billion level. So knowing whether it's there or not at 0.1% by weight is nowhere near as accurate as it's going to need to be. And most restricted substance lists don't list all of the different PFAS. They will list the ones that are illegal in most parts of the world, but don't usually list all of the thousands and thousands of PFAS that could be there. So I'm afraid to say having suppliers regularly and formally confirm that there are no PFAS on your lists won't mean that your products are free from PFAS. The only way to know if your products are free from PFAS is to drill the whole way down your supply chain, asking, are your products free from PFAS down to whatever the regulatory limit happens to be in the jurisdictions where you're supplying product. So, sorry, it's another can of worms. Throw me another one.
Great, another question. Yeah, I will. And I apologise in advance as well if I absolutely butcher the pronunciation of any words in these questions, but I'll give it my best shot. So under TASCA proposing for small businesses maybe being exempt, what is considered a small business? Is this based on import value or units?
I can't tell you that off the top of my head, but I can tell you that it's very clearly defined on the website for the proposed change. So they define in TSCA what a small business is, and you can look that up in the legislation.
And another one here is, if a product is made in the EU but sold in certain US states, must it comply with those US state laws?
Yes. It must, to be placed on the market in those US states. It must comply with US states' laws, yes.
Okay. What testing do you think will be required for PPWR threshold restrictions? And is the expectation that the producer conduct the testing if packaging is provided by the supplier, or is the supplier's DOC reasonable?
That is a really detailed question, which I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to answer here, but would require a bit of discussion. So probably best take that one offline. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Great. Is Canada planning on restricting intentionally added PFAS only, or contaminants as well?
That remains to be seen. It depends on how they're going to define things in their phase 2 uses that they choose. It could go either way. I think it's probably going to be more aligned to the US, but I'm holding up my hand there to say I genuinely don't know. I don't think anybody does. At the moment, the phase 1 is for something that is deliberately and mainly PFAS, so that phase 1 doesn't help you.
Is Minnesota filing every year, or only if there is a new product or change? I thought that you only registered the product one time and not every year over and over.
That I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. So again, I'll have to get back to you on that with an answer.
Okay, great. Is the OECD definition of PFAS the most inclusive / broad definition? In other words, does the OECD definition comprehensively reflect all PFAS?
I don't think it is the most comprehensive. It's because it does seem to be, for a lot of places, the basis, and then they start off with that as being the basic and then say, but also if it's got this extra bit, or then reducing from it. So what you can say is that if you follow the OECD definition, it's going to be nearly right. But I can't tell you if it's more comprehensive than others. No, because as I say, all of the different states define things differently.
Okay, great. This question, I'm going to do my best to get the pronunciation right. What are we expecting for the future of fluoroelastomers and polymers in Europe?
I think that what we should be expecting is to see a considerable reduction in where they're allowed to be used. So there won't be a blanket ban on all uses of FKM or on all uses of PTFE. There'll be specific allowed uses for the specific uses that are defined in the derogations. So if you have, for example, a fluoroelastomer seal that you're marketing at the moment today to be used in any application anywhere, that's not going to be possible in future. It'll only be allowed to be a fluoroelastomer seal marketed for places where that seal is absolutely explicitly necessary. In all of the places where it's not 100% necessary, then you'll have to use something else.
Okay.
So that's the market size for those uses will drop considerably.
Yeah. Great. And there are two questions here just based on PTFE. Is PTFE-based lubricating grease under the EU derogation? What about PTFE coatings, for example, non-sticking needs in moving parts, plastic or metal?
I strongly recommend reading all of the gory detail as to what's in the derogation, because it might be that you have PTFE grease in your specific use that is derogated, or PTFE grease in another use that's not. So again, as I say, with the fluoroelastomer seal, with a PTFE grease, you can't just assume that it's going to be okay. It'll be use specific, end use specific.
Okay. And then a question on any news in the textile industry.
Yeah, in the textile industry, you should expect that any kind of use of PFAS will be phased out. You should expect that for extreme environments, textile use might have a longer derogation, but you should expect that you will be losing the availability of having any kind of PFAS in textiles, which is a problem if you have breathable fabrics like I do in my coat. Yeah.
We are currently testing textiles with a water repellent treatment. Could you please clarify which regulatory requirements we should ensure compliance with? Should the results comply with REACH, POP, regulation, or both?
You should, if those coatings contain any fluorinated substance, I should go and try something else, because it will almost certainly not be something that's regulated under POPs, because they won't be on the market anymore, but they probably will be something that's going to be regulated under the general universal restriction. And so you'll have a product life of, what, 2.5 years max, probably, for a coating, if it's got fluoropolymer in it or some such.
What types of data would you expect to be passed along the supply chain as evidence of compliance, i.e. no PFAS? Should we expect to have testing reports or supplier declarations? I'm thinking from a food contact materials perspective.
From a food contact material perspective, I'd expect that you get certificates of compliance against what is legally required anyway. If you're in the EU, there is a list of substances that are allowed to be in food contact materials. So I'd expect that everything that's in the food contact material is on that list of approved things. PFAS won't be on there, or at least if they are on there, they won't be on there for much longer.
PFAS is widely used as a mold release, leaving the substance on the surface of articles. Is that an intentionally added substance?
Yes, it is. It's intentionally added and will be on the surface. In Europe, it will definitely be intentionally added, and it will be greater than parts per million. So it will be there. And if you wash it off, you'll be polluting with it. So in Europe, it's definitely a problem. In the US, it's not intentionally added into the product, but you have intentionally used it, so you should know it's there. Yeah.
If the PFAS limit is down at the PBB level, are water companies going to fail to comply as environment water will contain residual levels?
Right now, if you look at, you can see across the whole of Europe and the UK, the amount of PFAS that there is in your water. That's measured and reported at the parts per billion level. You can see how much there is in the rivers and things near where you live. And I can say that in the UK, there's legislation that's going through to make sure that that is measured. And it's being measured for all of the substances that are already regulated. And that's the same in Europe, and is moving to be all PFAS. They're looking at how they will do that. The legislation, when it comes to that, is changing, and it's becoming more and more onerous. And yes, it is down to very low levels, because the contamination is everywhere at very low levels. I can't say off the top of my head what the law is in the US, so I'll have to look at that and answer it based on where you are, if I know that. Yeah.
Great. And I'm just looking at the time here. I think we'll have time for one or two more. And then we'll give you a break, Kathy.
Okay.
Again, if we don't get to your question during this live session, we'll follow up with you directly. So a question on what about Australia? In 2025, asked about PFAS and seeing that there are certain movement from authorities. So in your opinion, what path is more likely to be taken by Australian authorities following Canada or the UK approach?
I think that they're probably going to do one or the other. Yes. I can't say for Australia as to which way they're going to go, but I think that you will find that PFAS regulation will spread. Yeah, that's all I can say on that one.
Then I'll make this the last question, but the alternatives, if they exist, do they avoid other chemical risks? For example, those of yet unregulated other halogens?
Part of the substitution considerations are if there will be regrettable substitutions. And that's something that was considered as part of the discussions that they have been having in the socioeconomic group and in the RAC in Europe. If you think that for your particular use, and you're in Europe, is going to potentially have a regrettable substitution, as in you're moving from one type of hazard, like you're moving from a POP, because it's a persistent organic pollutant, to something that is more flammable, which is realistic in some cases, then you're asking yourself, am I just swapping one hazard for the other? Which is worse? Weigh it up. Then the outcomes of the life cycle analysis that you've done on that is something to mention and discuss when you submit your responses to the consultation next month. That's the kind of information that they would really like to have. But if that information doesn't exist, then it will just go by the by. There were alternatives, for example, when they substituted trichloroethylene using the authorization route. There were substances that were more hazardous that are now in use, but weren't being regulated by the same means. Yet, the more hazardous flammable material is what is being used, rather than the trichloroethylene in totally enclosed systems, because that's the way the legislation drove it. It's not perfect, but you have to have the arguments and put them forward for them to be considered by a regulator.
Fantastic. Yes, thank you so much, Kathy, for all that information. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in with us today and submitting so many fantastic questions. We hope you found it helpful. And thanks to Kathy and to RINA for partnering with us on this webinar. It was absolutely fantastic. But we look forward to seeing you all in our upcoming webinar. So you can check out our resources section on the Compliance and Risks website to stay updated and access our latest content, including white papers, blogs, and webinars. Speaking of, we do have plenty of upcoming content available, so make sure you keep an eye out. Our next webinar, Asia Product Compliance, Regulatory Trends in Major Markets in 2025 and 2026, is scheduled for March 11th, and we hope to see you there. Thanks again, Kathy, for joining us today. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, and good luck, everybody.
Good luck and have a great rest of your day.